World Cup and immigration considerations around the World Cup, given some of the complications and unknowns around the current U.S. Various visa policies and immigration policies. So, just level setting quickly, the 2026 FIFA World Cup coming up in a few weeks is the largest sporting event in history. 78 of 104 matches are being played right here in the U.S. across 11 host cities. And that implicates millions of international visitors, thousands of athletes, coaches, officials, and support personnel, all navigating U.S. entry at a moment where the immigration environment is much more complex than it's been in a very long time. So we're here today because of the gap between what people assume about traveling to the US or have traditionally assumed about traveling to the US and what they actually need to know. Travel bans, a new visa bond program, expanded social media screening, device searches at the border. Those are real and present issues for people planning to attend this tournament. And so the purpose of today's session is to give you all practical and honest guidance. And in order to do that, there's no one better positioned than my colleague who I'll be speaking with today. Um, uh, Jason Levy is counsel at Grossman Young and Hammond. Before joining GYH, Jason spent 14 years in private practice and over 15 years as senior attorney directly in the office of the General Counsel at DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, where he worked directly on many of the policies and programs that we will be discussing today. So he brings a practitioner's fluency and not only expertise in theory, but in the actual practice, both from the private practice side and from the public sector side to this topic. That's truly unique. So really appreciate Jason joining me as I'll be moderating and interviewing Jason. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we dive in. We'll run up until no later than 1 p.m. today. Jason will take us through some substantive topics for the first portion, and then if there is Q&A from those who are attending today's webinar, you can use the Q&A function to submit questions at any point, and then I'll be monitoring them throughout the conversation. We'll surface them at the end or throughout our conversation. One just important throat clearing note, nothing in today's webinar constitutes legal advice. So we're providing general information and practical guidance. If you have a specific situation that comes up and requires legal counsel, and we'll be talking about some of those scenarios that could come up today, we're always happy to help, and we'll share information about how to reach us in one of the chat boxes today. So, Jason, thanks again for joining me, and let's just dive in.
Yeah,
So,
good to see you, Mark.
starting with the basics here, who actually needs a visa to attend the World Cup, and what are the different pathways available to international travelers?
Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction, Mark. I happy to try to lend my thoughts on these various topics. I know that there's some anxiety for a lot of people entering the United States under the the new immigration the more enforcement minded approach to immigration law and immigration practice that we see under this administration. There are a lot of ways that I think, as you know, and probably most know, that people are maybe eligible to enter the United States. The primary way is I'm thinking more focusing on attendees, fans, people who are really coming to not necessarily participate in the games themselves or work in some capacity with FIFA or otherwise or the teams. I'm mostly focused right now on fans, but we can talk about the others too if there's a good reason to. For the most part, the way that individuals will be seeking to enter the United States, there's kind of like three buckets, I would say. There's people who need to get a visa, and the most likely visa people will be seeking will be a B1 or B2 visa. That is the visitor visa for pleasure. That's the B2 visa, and the visitor visa for business, the B1 visa. Others who I'll also talk about, they'll be looking to enter under our visa waiver program. There's no visa available. Some people refer to that as ESTA. Those individuals essentially come for the same purposes that a B1 or B2 visitor come from, which I'll mention more in a moment. But they have different rules and restrictions, and they do not, as mentioned, as you would assume from the name, the visa requirement is waived for these individuals. And then there's special allowances for, just a very few countries who don't fall in either of those buckets, the main two being Canada and Bermuda. So for the first group, the probably I don't know, maybe the largest group certainly represents the largest numbers of people worldwide, the B1 or B2 visa. Most people in the world who want to come to see to watch these games in the United States, to watch their favorite team, they will need to obtain a B1 or B2 visa if they don't already have one. They might already have one. If they already have one, good for them. They don't need to go get a new one as long as it's still valid. They can use that visa for purposes of traveling to the United States to ask for admission into the United States, for these purposes. Um, Most people probably would need to get a visa. That involves going to the State Department, making an application I'm sorry, going to a consular post of the State Department in their home country, and applying for the visa itself. That requires an appointment. The B2 visa is the primary visa I think people would be looking to obtain, although most consular offices will issue a joint B1, B2 visa to individuals who are issued a visa. The B2 visa is sort of like the classic tourist visa. There's a lot of ways that people can, take advantage of the B2 visa legally in the United States. They might be entering to see family. They might need medical care. But for these purposes, for most people, they're going to want to come in for tourism and to attend the World Cup games. So it's probably the visa they'd be looking for. The B1 visa is a visitor for business visa. It's a very complex concept as to what people can and cannot do as a business visitor. But the statutory authorities are clear that for either of these classifications, people are not permitted to engage in local employment for hire. What that means is a very complex question. It's a very complex term of art. And so, we can talk more. I don't think it's probably necessary to get too deep into the weeds on that specific concept. But generally speaking, when you're here in the United States as a visitor, you're not allowed to be engaging in productive labor and work, certainly not for a U.S. employer, but also generally not even for other employers outside of the United States. There are exceptions to the type of activities people can participate in. Happy to take questions about that if people are expecting to come into the United States to do both. Because if you're going to do both business and visit for pleasure, you're going to be looking at the B1 visa. So for people who have like multiple reasons for being here, these questions as to what they can and can't do may be important. For the B visa, usually people are admitted for 6 months. They can be admitted for less if a CBP officer says so. They have a lot of discretion when they come in, and they might say, this didn't really happen very much in previous administrations, but we're seeing it more today, where there are authorities where that allow the CBP officer who's doing the inspection to say, how long are you coming in for? What are you doing? Oh, you only need 3 weeks instead of the normal 6 months. But generally speaking, you will get 6 months here in the United States. The nice thing about being here as a B visitor is if you wish, once you're here, if you want to stay for longer, there's a process where you can apply to extend your stay so you have more time in the United States. So I'm going to move on to the VWP, the Visa Waiver Program, if that's okay, Mark. But I would stop for a second to see if you have any questions about any of that.
No, that's great. Please dive forward.
All right, keep going. So the VWP, the Visa Waiver Program, this is sort of the classic, I don't need a visa to go to the United States type of visa. Americans are pretty familiar with traveling this way. For people who, do travel internationally, we're sort of lucky that there's a lot of countries that we can visit without getting a visa just to go and, hang out and have some fun. Same holds in reverse. It's a reciprocal program largely, where there's a, pretty extensive statutory authority under the Immigration and Nationality Act that allows individuals of certain countries that are designated by the Secretary of Homeland Security in consultation. Actually, it might require the concurrence of the Secretary of State. There's a whole like litany of threshold requirements that those countries must satisfy. In the early days of the VWP, it was really looked at as a travel facilitation program. If you talk to people in DHS now, they really look at it as a security program, because in order for countries to be party to the VWP and be designated, they have to have satisfy a lot of different security protocols, have low overstay rates for their nationals. There's a lot of things that there's different agreements that they need to sign, and a lot of information sharing goes into it. So what happens for these individuals, they don't need a visa. They need what a lot of people refer to as ESTA. So an ESTA is really it's a system. I think what is it? It stands for Electronic System for Travel Authorization. It's an online system. You just if you Google ESTA, it's going to come up very fast. So people go there, they answer a lot of questions that mainly go to, their reason for being here and their kind of biographical history, things that it's going to be a litany of questions. Things like, have you ever committed crimes, certain crimes? Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever violated your immigration status or had a visa refused? Things like that. You kind of punch in all your answers, some biographical information, and usually the system will spit back a response in a matter of moments. It costs about $40. That's not terrible. But and if it's approved, the ESTA authorization is valid for 2 years. So you'll get one of two responses, or generally speaking, you'll get one of two responses. You'll either have an approval, and then that sort of sits in your record, and CBP the Customs and Border Protection officers who do the inspections, the carriers, the airlines that you might be using to enter the United States, they all can access that, know that you're allowed to come to the United States and seek to enter under this program. Uh, you might get a denial, though. You might get a refusal. If that happens, you need to get a visa. So, it's really a smart idea if you do not already have an ESTA authorization and you are from a country. There's 43 countries. Mostly they're like Western European countries, Japan, Australia. It's a lot of countries that we have, that we have, uh, a lot of travel engagement with, and of also a lot of history of travelers where we don't have, significant immigration issues. But simply, if you're not sure if you're from a VWP country, you can simply look online. Information will pop up on the CBP website. If you are and you want to travel to the U.S. to attend World Cup games, you should do that really today, because if you do get a refusal, you're going to need as much time as possible to get that visa, if you don't already have it. And so
Okay.
the important thing to remember about the VWP, two important things. One is you do give up some abilities, rights, when you enter that way. For one, you're admitted for 90 days. That's it. You have to leave after 90 days. You cannot extend that stay. You can leave and then re-enter again and ask for another 90 days if you want, but there's no way to extend your stay, to change your status. Once that 90 days is up, with very limited exceptions, there are always exceptions. Your purpose is complete and you need to leave. You also give up a lot of rights in the event that you are found to be deportable, removable, we say. You really don't have a lot of rights to defend against your removability if something goes wrong. The expectation is that you just will be here, you'll comply, and you'll be gone within 90 days. So that's the VWP. The last bit, I'll be really brief on Canada and Bermuda. For the most part, we have statutory authorities that allow us to just kind of broadly waive the visa requirement under certain circumstances, and we've done that with the Department of State and Homeland Security. Those two agencies kind of coordinate on these questions. For contiguous countries, we can have sort of a reciprocal visa waiver policy. So Canada and Bermuda, their nationals don't require visas for the most part at all. There's a few types of visas those nationals require, but if you're Canadian or Bermudan, then you will not need a visa to come to the United States to attend the World Cup. My last point on this topic is having a visa is for most place for mo or ESTA authorization, or if you're Canadian or Bermudan, that visa, that authorization, that allows you to get to the border. it doesn't guarantee your admission to the United States. All it does is allow you to ask for admission under that particular classification. So yeah, those are the main buckets there, Mark.
Thanks so much, Jason. So very helpful overview. There's one topic that I've heard a little bit about that I'd love if you could share any color that you have, which is the FIFA Pass. What actually is it? What does it do? And does it help with anything in terms of if somebody's concerned about their timing, will it expedite timing for a consular appointment? What should folks looking at a FIFA pass be thinking about right now, and how should they be utilizing it, if at all?
Yeah, that's important. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, the FIFA Pass is actually a really nice avenue that the Department of Homeland Security and State Department kind of coordinated on to offer, mostly State Department really, to offer individuals opportunities to have expedited appointments. So you can go online and we can I'll try to drop a link, but you can see if you Google for this too, you can see what the wait is for a visa appointment at every consulate around the world for people who are seeking B visas. For some, it's very short; it's just a couple of weeks. For some, it's like a month, and for some, it's many months. There are some, I could rattle off a few, but there are several countries where the consulates and the U.S. consulates in those countries, it could be, over a year before you get an appointment for a visitor visa to the United States. So that's not really tenable because, many of these countries have nationals who want to be here. Their teams are participating. So FIFA Pass, the FIFA Travel Pass concept is to try to help expedite appointments for certain people who are hoping to visit the United States in order to attend World Cup games. It's just a website. You go onto the website, and there's sort of like a several step process to it. But basically, what the idea of the FIFA Travel Pass portal will allow is if you have a ticket to games that you bought directly from the FIFA.com website, it can't be from like some from second level ticket distributor or third party ticket distributor. Has to be from the FIFA.com website. You can go into the website, you can register yourself, and then you kind of go through the process of applying for a visa and setting up an appointment. And the appointment systems will link to your FIFA Pass, your FIFA Travel Pass account. And if they are able to match those, which they should be, and they'll see that you have the tickets and mostly you just it's an attestation based uh, portal. So it's not like you give like a ticket number, is my understanding. You click yes or no, but they will ask for those tickets. They will when you go to the interview, those tickets need to be typically presented. And the main value of using FIFA Travel Pass is for those people who need a appointment with their consulate with the U.S. consulate in their home country sooner than would typically be available. What it does do is that what it doesn't do, it doesn't guarantee a visa. It doesn't guarantee admission into the country. It doesn't guarantee you a timely appointment. There may be appointments available. They also could be filled. If they're already filled for every single appointment at that consulate, it can only be but so soon. They can only push it up until the date that appointments are actually open. Some consulates have opened additional appointments because of the circumstances, and they recognize that people are hoping to get here. But it's not like the answer. It's a channel that allows you to hopefully be able to visit the United States when you might just be kind of like blocked out by the backlog. Um, and you still need a valid passport. Naturally, that's a critical element of qualifying for an interview to begin with, including through FIFA Travel Pass. We can talk a little bit more. I know, one point we wanted to get to at some point was the passport related issues. And we can get to that whenever, but I want to put a pin in it for either right now or a little bit later, Mark.
Sure. Let's talk about that right now. What are some of the passport related issues that you see could be likely to come up in this context or other contexts, and what should folks be thinking about? And before you answer, I'll just note that we've put in the chat the link to the State Department's website for the FIFA pass
Oh,
for folks.
great. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so having a valid passport is sort of step one. It's not I'm going to step back. Most countries require naturally you have to have a valid passport to travel if you're not from that country and you want to visit that country. But a valid passport that's going to be expiring in short order is not is in many countries is not going to be enough. Most countries, for most people, have some sort of limitation around that. Here in the United States, our limitation, we call it the 6 month rule. The 6 month rule is um is a it's based on a statutory provision. That's what it's grounded in. That essentially says that your passport, in order to be admitted to the United States, needs to be valid for 6 months beyond the date that you are intending to be here until. So what that means is, let's say your passport is going to expire within 6 months. Well, you can't use it at all. If your passport is going to expire in 7 months, the most time that could be authorized to an individual who's seeking admission using that passport would be a month. So the sort of general rule of thumb for most people is have a passport that's valid for at least a year, if you can. If you don't have a passport that's valid for at least a year, it still might be serviceable as long as it's valid for at least 6 months. But for an important exception, there are a lot of countries that the United States has agreements with that we refer to these countries as the 6 month club. So individuals who are nationals of countries that are members of this club, they are in good shape as long as their passport is valid. And so, if you're valid, if your passport's valid, you're good to go. However, if you're only going to be, let's say your passport's going to be is valid, but only for 3 months, you're only going to be admitted for 3 months, but in most instances. You're not going to, let's say you want 6 months, but your passport's valid for 3 months, you're probably going to be admitted only for 3 months. But the fact of having a valid passport has more value for people from these countries. It's another thing that's very easy to locate online. If you put in 6 month rule or 6 month club in Google, it's going to pop up, and there's going to be a link to the countries that are members, and you can get more information about your specific situation that way.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so important thing to know. So 6 months from the last date that you plan on being in the United States is when your passport needs to be validated in order to not run into this issue. Is that
Unless
is
you're a
that right,
member of that.
Jason? Yeah,
Yes, unless you're a member of that club, unless your
that's right.
country is right. Exactly. Yes.
Right. Okay. So great. So let's move on to another topic, which is the travel bans that this administration has been putting in place and implications of that. So there's been a lot of talk about and reporting around the travel bans and the new related visa bond requirement. Can you explain a little bit more about the background of that visa bond requirement? What's actually in place right now from a policy and legal perspective, and who could be affected in the context of the World Cup?
Yeah, happy to. I'm going to start with the visa bond, right? Um, so the visa bond is the visa bond is authorized again by law under the Immigration and Nationality Act. For these purposes, it's authorized with respect to individuals who need a B1 or B2 visa. So there is authority to require this bond for people who are seeking that visa. Um, and then from there, there's a whole program that was set up to operationalize this visa bond. The visa bond program has been in existence for quite some time, and the authorities have been there for a long time too. It just has it's been difficult to operationalize. It's been on the books. There's policy around it, but this is the first time where it's really been um, operationalized with some real oomph, some real rigor to it, where we're really seeing a lot of use. What it means is that people from visa bond subject countries, and there are 50 of them. Another thing, again, I'm sorry, I don't have the links. I have the links handy, and we can try to drop them in as time goes on. But the nationals of these 50 countries if they are seeking a B1 or B2 visa right now under this program, which is still in many respects a pilot program, so it could conclude, but not early enough for World Cup travelers, the visa bond, the consular officer who's involved in issuing the visa would essentially require the foreign national applying for the visa to pay a bond of either five, ten, or $15,000. The mechanism for doing that is through pay.gov. There's a form that gets completed. It's the process itself is not super complicated, but of course the cost is, pretty significant for a lot of people. There are ways to um, get that money back. If somebody were to be subject to the visa bond, pay the bond, and they come to the United States and they leave timely, they would get a return of their bond. But there are some nice exceptions to the visa bond requirement that actually just were issued just earlier this week, I think, or late last week. I think it was late last week. Um, so the visa bond requirement that people would be subject to from these 50 countries is going to be waived for fans who are nationals of competing countries. So if your country is not competing in FIFA in the World Cup, then it's not going to help you. But if your country is, then you might be in luck as long as you obtained your tickets to the World Cup before April 15th and you opted into that FIFA travel pass system that we talked about earlier. So it's helpful, it's limited. It's not going to help everyone who wants to attend the World Cup who would be subject to the bond. If you're not eligible for the waiver, you can still pay the bond and you will get your money back after you return home, or if you never travel to the United States at all. If you overstay or do certain things in the United States, and that then you could forfeit that bond, and that's what the bond is attempting to protect against.
And it sounds like just from a rough review of the website, and again, I put the State Department link of the visa bond program in the chat, that the visa bond will be anywhere between five and $15,000, depending at the time of the interview, the determination of those consular officers conducting the interview.
That's right. I think it's in $5,000 increments. So it wouldn't be like $5,071. And it's up to the consular officer. My understanding is they kind of have certain just generally applicable policies at different consulates around the world, but nothing is locked. So, it might be a country where generally speaking, they're going to think $10,000 bond, but it depends on the person's resources and sort of like the other factors of their biographical history, their immigration history, the level of risk that's perceived by the officer. It could be more or less.
Got it. Okay. Very helpful. So let's pivot now to talking about what actually happens when folks you've gotten the visa. You're now arriving at the port of entry. You're getting ready to enter the United States. So let's talk about what happens when you actually arrive now. For visitors who have their visas in order, like even for visitors who have their visas, it's possible that they could run into issues at the border. It's happened before. It's happening now in different ways. What should travelers be prepared for at a high level?
Yeah, so I know this is where the anxiety for people really kicks in. They are excited to attend the World Cup. They're excited to come to the United States. They have, paid for their airfare, their itinerary is set, and then they have this massive hurdle that some people, feel like they are going to experience when they arrive. By and far, it's going to be a pretty simple process. Similar to what people have experienced entering the United States for many years. You come into the United States, you arrive at the United States port of entry, or either a land border or maybe an airport. You kind of get in line, you go and you meet with a Customs and Border Protection officer who does an inspection. And that first inspection is what we call primary inspection. A lot of people are really familiar with it. That officer will have access to systems, right at his fingertips or her fingertips. They can see, real like if there are red flags that will show up for them. But typically they're going to ask kind of like the normal questions. Why are you here? What's your plan? who are you visiting? Where are you staying? How long are you staying for? And in most instances, they'll say, sounds great. Have a great time. Enjoy the United States of America, and all is fine. If things are not fine at the primary inspection site, that doesn't mean that there is necessarily some, catastrophic result for people. What it does mean is that the officer either had some questions, some further questions that the answers gave rise to. That that whatever maybe somebody said, "Oh, I'm going to come to the United States and I'm going to go to the World Cup, but I'm also going to, uh, you know, be like, participating with this employer that I work with, and we're gonna, I'm gonna try to sell some of my products, or who knows what the person will say. But if it doesn't sound like it's exactly right for the B2 classification or the B1 classification, they might say, this person really needs to participate in more questioning. They also might have flags about an individual's admissibility. If there's criminal background, an immigration hit, other hits that national security type hits that they will see. They're not going to have time. They only have a few minutes per individual. They can't talk to each person thoroughly if there are any questions. And an important qualification is that it is the burden of the traveler to demonstrate and prove to the officer that he or she is admissible. It's not the burden of the officer to prove that you're not. So, and it's a high burden. That burden has to be met by clear and convincing evidence. So if the officer has any doubts, they probably will send you to secondary inspection. Secondary inspection is another area of the terminal that, you come into the terminal, you go through inspection, they will say, can you please go to this other space? You will sit down and you will wait for your turn. And then you'll probably have a much more in-depth conversation with another CBP officer, perhaps a supervisor, who will go through a separate but related line of questioning, depending on what the concern is. If the concern is what your activities are, they're going to look at your activities more closely. If there are possible criminal issues, the question is going to be, do we think that makes you inadmissible to the country? And if so, what's the next step? So that the general process is that some suggestions, things to carry that would be helpful, I think, to people coming into the United States, and some basic thoughts on just how to approach this moment. I would definitely have the World Cup tickets handy. So they can see either electronically or if you have a paper ticket, either one would be fine. If you have other plans, you need to ensure that they're consistent with the purpose of your visa classification. It's not just being here to visit in order to attend the World Cup is fine, but it doesn't allow you to do whatever you want while you're here. You're restricted to, certain types of activities. So if you are going to engage in other activities and you're not certain whether they are permissible, you should talk to a lawyer to find out what is or isn't permissible ahead of time, so that when you get to the border, you know what you can and can't do and only represent those options. I mean, those plans. If you do come forward with plans that are outside of the realm, naturally, of what would be permissible, the CBP officer is just going to immediately have questions and issues. I would suggest entering with the phone number of the consulate for your country. You can carry that with you, and that's important because you do have the right to contact your consulate. If you have a lawyer, then you should have that individual's contact information also available in writing, maybe not on your phone in case your phone dies or you don't have access to it for some reason. And you also would want to carry along with you, um, uh, if you don't know them by heart, information to contact your family members. I would suggest if you are sent to secondary, informing somebody that that has happened. You can just text a family member, you can text your lawyer, or just make contact so that people know what is going on and that people can track that. It might not be long, it might be an hour, but it might be many hours that you're in secondary inspection. So you want people to be kind of aware that's where you are, so that they and if you're traveling with other people, that might be covered anyway. But you want people to be aware so that if other more difficult issues arise, that you're kind of a step forward and hopefully addressing those issues. There's a lot more that we could say about this, but I'll stop for a moment.
So that's great. So a couple of high level takeaways from what you've just said. At the border, make sure your tickets are easily accessible. Make sure the purpose of the visit is consistent with the purpose of the visa, and make sure to have contact information available for your lawyer if you have one, your family contact if needed, in the consulate where your interview was held.
Yes.
And then finally, the last thing I heard you say was if you are sent to secondary to make sure that you inform your lawyer and family member. Is there anything there was a follow-up question that I had here, which is what materials and personal belongings remain accessible to you and what don't if you're taken into secondary?
So you're only going to have what's on you, so you'll have your your whatever bag that you carried on to the flight. I know this is a little different than in some countries, but here in the United States, you go through inspection first and then you pick up your baggage. So you probably are only going to have what you carried on the plane on you. You will have your device, and I know that's an area we want to talk about, jump into a little bit more. But that's it. If whatever so if it's important documentation, copies of passports, things like that, which are also wise to bring with you, not just electronic copies, but actual physical copies. You should have them on you on the airplane, not checked underneath the plane.
Okay. And is there anything that you can say about what sort of social media documentation that CBP tends to be looking into these days?
Yeah, so one of the this kind of gets into the digital world, obviously. So the social media is really an area that of pretty significant interest when you're applying for a visa and when you're applying for admission to the United States to enter the country. So the basic rule when you are being inspected by an officer when you're entering the United States in primary or secondary is that the officer can do what's called a basic search. They don't need a warrant. They don't need even a reasonable suspicion. They can just look. They can open the Fourth Amendment protections at the border are against search and unreasonable search and seizure are are very different than when somebody is actually inside the country physically and has been admitted to the country. So you don't have a lot. You don't have the same kind of rights. Even if you're a U.S. citizen, you don't have the same sort of rights when you come to the border. So they can look through your bag, as we all know. They can kind of like fish through it. They can look at your documents, but they can also look at your phone. And so when they're looking at your phone, they're going to be looking at whatever is on the phone. They're not supposed to be accessing the cloud, things that are remote, things that would need to be downloaded. So, as a general principle, it's smart when you're approaching the border, turn off your Wi-Fi, maybe turn off your your cellular connection because whatever they see is what they can see. So if you open your social media and it's already like pulling down data and it brings up things that you were not expecting and they see that information, that perhaps is a problem. Just like if a think of an officer who like comes to your house for some anodyne, insignificant reason. They knock on the door, you open the door, and then they see some drug paraphernalia in your home. Well, now they can do a lot more, right? And so if you're not to encourage people to, naturally hide their ill intent, but it does lead to a trail of reasonable suspicion and sometimes probable cause where the activities that the officers can engage in with regard to your device can jump much, much deeper. But what they're going to be looking for in social media, they're interested in things like what else are you going to do while you're here? Have you been texting people or is there on your social media messages or indication that actually you are going to be, working for your company or for a different company or that you're not going to do what you said you're going to do. So your activities can sometimes be revealed on your social media. And if it's not consistent with your statements, that can actually be problematic. Secondly, they're going to look at your sort of broader activities, your political activities, your stances politically. Have you made any anti-American statements, supported anti-American groups as, and I say anti-American loosely. This is, however, the administration is defining those types of activities and groups. So it can be quite broad because what they're looking for is you do have First Amendment rights at the border, even people who are visiting and who are not American citizens. But what it means for you is you can say, I'm not sharing this information with you. I'm not answering your question. You do have the right to remain silent. You do have the right to not answer questions. You do have the right to not give them your phone. The consequences of that, however, are going to be that you're not going to be able to answer their questions and you're not going to establish that you're admissible to the country. So if you're not going to share that information, they're probably not going to let you in. Um, they can also, under those circumstances, they can actually seize your device if you refuse to let them see it. Even they need to typically go to talk to a supervisor, may or may not require a warrant, and they have technology to really do deep dives into devices right there at the border. And if necessary, they can hold on to it. There's, a lot of complex rules around that. But for social media, just to answer your question more directly, Mark, you're really they're going to be looking at the activities that you say to see if your activities as expressed on social media are consistent with your activities that you claim that you're going to participate in the United States, and they're going to look at the type of activities you engage in, type of people that you tend to that you favorited or liked, things like that, to see if there might be some larger issue that could affect your admissibility.
Sounds good. So thanks, Jason. That's very helpful. Before we dive into our last topic, I think there's this because this CBP and border entry topic is one that's of interest to a lot of folks. Can you talk a little bit about some of the services here that Grossman Young provides? I know, for instance, that one of the things that Grossman Young does is actually making lawyers available on an as needed basis at CBP for folks who need. So, can you just talk a little bit about that service?
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity, Mark. Yeah, we do provide that service. We provide travel representation. We have a program called Transcend Entry where we provide representation to people who are entering the United States at that point of entry. So there's a lot of value to this. We think there's not a lot of firms that provide it. It does offer some peace of mind, but it also can offer some really important access if issues do arise during the inspection process. When somebody's being inspected, they can be detained. They can be placed in removal proceedings. Under certain circumstances, CBP officers even have the opportunity and the ability, I should say, to remove somebody through a process called expedited removal. If they think that you're misrepresenting the purpose of your visit, you don't have the right documents, they can just turn you around and actually remove you without a hearing, and then you're barred from returning for 5 years, maybe longer, depending on the reason why they pursued expedited removal against you. Um, so, the stakes are high, and sometimes it's helpful to have an attorney on call because they can advise you as to your options. They're if you're in that situation, sometimes an officer might suggest that maybe just withdraw your application for admission and turn around and go home rather than kind of continue to pursue your admission. Maybe that's advantageous for you. But I would uh as to the travel representation itself, there is no right to counsel when you're in an inspection. That's regulatory. That's the law that dictates how CBP operates. They don't have to allow an attorney's involvement or presence, but that doesn't mean that they won't, and it certainly doesn't mean that they can't. So when you enter that situation, if there are difficulties, if there are issues, it can help to have a lawyer ready and available that at that time, as a somebody seeking to enter the United States, you could say to the officer, I have a lawyer. Can we involve that lawyer? I think they can help, kind of resolve whatever the difficult issue is that the person is facing at the border. It might be a legal issue, it might be a documentation issue, it might be a misunderstanding. And a lot of times the officers, they want to get to the end game. They have a lot of people to see, and it can be really helpful. It can facilitate a response. Even if you're not able to communicate with a lawyer yourself, you can communicate with a family member by text when you're getting, when you learn that you're going to be in secondary, or if you're waiting in secondary, family members can communicate with us as well. Sometimes, depending on where you're being admitted, we have colleagues who can assist. On the ground, people who are familiar with the CBP operations and the ports of entry, who have different types of access, and sometimes that can be helpful too. And so, for many people, it ends up being peace of mind. For many people, it actually helps facilitate their entry and helps to, prevent them from finding themselves in a worse situation than they have to be in.
And Jason, if somebody wants to actually move forward with that, that's something where they would want to reach out to us, give us a heads up, and actually let us know ahead of time when they are planning to arrive and to retain us for that period of time. Is that right? How would that practically work?
Yeah, exactly. They would just reach out to our firm. We set up an appointment with them. We send a questionnaire to try to unearth any potential difficulties that a person might experience based on their background and their history, immigration violations, criminal violations, other things like that. And then if there's a significant problem, we can get on the phone and have a consultation with them. But we would collect their information about their travels. We would provide them with our notice of representation that they can carry with them when they're seeking to enter the country. And then we also give them the number of a hotline that they can call 24/7. It's always available, and we make sure it's available to people during their travel window. We will provide them with a lawyer who will be on call to assist during that window, and then a backup lawyer as well, so that if any issues arrive, we have some redundancy for them. It's a pretty straightforward process.
Yeah, straightforward and holistic. Okay, great. So, last question, and again, reminder: anybody who has a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. Otherwise, we can wrap up after this question. We're getting close to the hour mark anyway. So, okay, you're in the country. You've enjoyed the FIFA World Cup. You've had a great time. All of this was just extra preparation that you didn't need. So the tournament runs through mid-July. Many visitors will want to stay longer, travel more broadly, have interest in exploring this wonderful country further. What are the key things that folks need to know about the length of their authorized stay? And what happens if something goes wrong in terms of either overstaying or something else?
Yeah, that's great and really important. So it depends, of course, on how you enter. As I mentioned earlier, maybe you're entering with a visa, based on a visa that was issued in your passport. If you entered on the visa waiver program, if you entered from Canada and because you're Canadian, there's different rules, but a lot of the consequences are the same, and a lot of the eligibilities are the same. So let's say you're here as a B2, you said you wanted to go to the games, but you also never said you're gonna go check out the Grand Canyon or go to Disney World or what have you while you're here. That's fine. This is typical stuff. As long as it's normal B2 activity, visitor for pleasure activity, no problem. Let's say you want to do something different, that is not permitted in the B2 classification. Well, then you need to apply. You can seek, you can file an application with USCIS. That's the benefits administering agency for the Department of Homeland Security for immigration benefits. You can file a request to change your status to a status that would allow that activity, perhaps, if you're otherwise eligible. Um, if you want to stay longer, you came in, you were going to see games for a month, and the officer said, okay, fine, you only need 5 weeks then, and they only admit you for 5 weeks. But then, you decide you're going to tack on some time, or what you want to stay longer, what have you. You can file for an extension of stay, meaning that you are asking USCIS again to allow you to stay for a lengthier period of time. The really important factor there is to file that application before your period of stay expires. When you enter the United States, you are issued what's called an I-94, which is an arrival departure record. And when that in the old days, you actually used to get a piece of, a little piece of cardboard that they would put in your passport that would tell you when you need to leave by. Now they don't. So it's really important for every traveler who enters the United States to go onto the CBP website. If you punch in CBP I-94, it's going to pop up and you can input some of your basic data, like your name, your passport number, your country of citizenship, and it will pop out that I-94, which you really would be smart to print out and hold on to you because it's also a documentation that evidences that you're lawfully here in the United States in case you ever do have an encounter with immigration enforcement while you're here. That will be your proof of status. So it also will tell you when you need to leave by. So sometimes people think I'm coming in, I'm going to be admitted for 6 months, everything's good, but their I-94 shows that they were only admitted for 45 days, and nobody, even the officer, never told them. That's not their problem. That's going to be your problem if you stay for 46 days. So once you stay beyond that period of authorized stay, if you haven't requested an extension, some other legal status that allows you to be here, what's going to happen is you immediately become removable, deportable. It's not like somebody's going to knock on your door and pick you up immediately, but you are legally removable from the United States. You begin to accrue what's called unlawful presence. If you gain too much unlawful presence and leave the United States, you could be barred for 3 or 10 years. The visa in your passport is voided by operation of law. And you, generally speaking, cannot extend your stay or change your status any longer. There are some exceptions, and there are some possibilities if you end up becoming eligible for, seeking a green card. It might not be fatal that you violated your status by overstaying your period of stay, but in many circumstances, probably most, it would. It would mean that you cannot get a green card, at least here in the country. You'd have to leave first. Naturally, for people under the visa waiver program, as mentioned before, at that 90-day period, there's no extension of stay, change of status. You need to go. Otherwise, at day 91, again, there's always exceptions. Day 91, you're here unlawfully and removable. Um, so yeah, it's important to get, I really highly recommend getting that I-94 form so you know all the details of when you're allowed to be here until, and you can take the necessary steps to extend that stay or change your status if needed or desired or appropriate.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful, Jason. Before we wrap up, any last thoughts, any topics that we should have covered but didn't, questions you wish I'd asked but didn't, um, in the last 30 seconds or minute or so, final thoughts? Great. Well, Jason, this has been incredibly useful. Thank you for bringing this level of clarity to a truly complicated and nuanced policy environment, immigration environment, and a fast-moving set of issues. So, for those of you on the call, for those of you watching this afterwards on recorded video, if you have a specific situation that needs requires individual guidance, we're here to help. I've put my and Jason's email addresses in this chat box. We've also put a link for individual consultations. Um, we are happy to provide calls and guidances and consultations for those who need. Wishing you all very, very safe travels to the United States. Again, hopefully, this is all more background than you will end up needing for your specific situations. But our job as lawyers is to help you to prepare as best you can for what is frankly a really complicated environment in the United States right now. So please do share this recording with other folks in your network who are planning to come to the United States, who are planning to enjoy the World Cup here. And I think that's about it from us. So thank you all so much for joining today and have a great afternoon wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Take care.
Bye bye.